Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good evening to you all. In the name of God, the most merciful, the most kind, and prayers and benedictions be upon His last and final prophet, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Thank you very much for having me tonight. I think the title of the talk was Islam and, what was it, Edward?
Islam and Britain. When Britain meets Islam.
When Britain meets Islam. Okay. So, I'm going to touch on a few themes today. Hopefully we can have a bit of conversation about it as well. It's more of a thought really of mine and my experiences in the last 20 years. I've now finally, it's no longer a fad from my parents can admit. So I've been longer Muslim than non-Muslim. And so it's my sort of reflections on those 20 years. And where I've come, and focusing a great deal on this concept of that I'm very passionate about recently, because I think it's very, very important for us to understand it and our own journey, and the journey that our next generation of Muslims in England have to make, which is focusing on the concept that Joseph Campbell had of the hero's journey. He was a great mythologist, and he studied all the world's mythologies and religions, and he found he was looking for commonalities between them, and he came up basing a lot of his work as well on psychology of the archetypes, his archetypes and so forth. He found this commonality, he had 17 steps, I think, if I'm correct, my memory serves me correctly, of this journey that we have of life. This journey of you come into this life, and then you have initiation, and then separation, then initiation, and then return in life. It's like circular experience of life, and it's very, very important that we understand that every individual has this journey they have to make in their life, in order that we can basically contextualize and give people relevance in their life. And we very, very much need to do that for our community. So the first theme that I'm really going to look at regarding this, in terms of us living in Britain as Muslims, as a Muslim community, is the concept of being grounded. It's very, very. We've really, lost that in the modern world. This feeling of being grounded, because the social structures that most communities and civilizations historically took for granted, we don't have them. We live in a very individualistic society, and we don't really have the family unit, the community around us that support us. And even those people, and this is a real struggle especially for the Asian subcontinent community, they come from that sort of background. And now there's this tug from their traditions and their culture from back home, and their needs in the community and the society that they're living in now. And so there's this real, and this is why we're suffering from many, just recently also, obviously, I think it's been 3 days now, hasn't it, since the incident outside Westminster, is that this is just about people being very ungrounded and uprooted, and not feeling centered in their being. That's the reality of the situation. That's why we've got these extremes happening. And so the first thing that we have really is this essential need to feel rooted in something. And I, growing up, definitely didn't feel that. I came from a broken home. My father and mother divorced when I was around 7, I think. I'm from Maidstone, Kent, and I didn't feel any relevance to the town that I lived in. I didn't feel any relevance in my relationship with my father and my mother, and I didn't even support England when it came to the World Cup. I actually supported Romania, I think. So I think way back then, I think the Romanian team wasn't bad in that year. So it was very interesting that I didn't have any sort of affiliation towards being English, and I think many young English people and probably feel like that as well. And this isn't because, as I said, an ill feeling towards the English culture. It's just a feeling of being uprooted, and not feeling there's any not feeling a sense of relevance. So what I found really interesting is that when I ended up leaving Maidstone, Kent, and going to study at Leeds University Arabic, which happened by chance. My hero's journey was it came and smacked me in the face rather than I was looking for it. They said that I flunked my A-levels, and I phoned the university and says, give me anything you can, because I want my independence and I want to get away from my family. And I flunked my A-levels. So I thought I was doing ancient history at Leeds University, so I thought I wanted to be an archaeologist because I'd watched all 3 Indiana Jones movies. And only to know that archaeology is not that an interesting subject. You don't get to be Indiana Jones as an archaeologist. Turned up at phoned the university, give me anything you got, and they offered me Chinese, Russian or Arabic. And I thought, my God, what am I going to... The only language I studied for my GCSEs was French, and that was the teacher I loathed the most. And so I said, anyway, the Arabic, does it have any history involved? Yes. Okay, I'll do the Arabic. So I turn up into Leeds, and I'm in the Arabic department, standing amongst majority Pakistanis, who I've never really frequented before in my life, and women with scarves on their head and men with big beards, a lot of them. And I thought, is this an Amish farmers convention? You know, I had no idea where I was. I was uprooted from being uprooted. And then the first dissertation I had to do was Muhammad, the most successful prophet or statesman. And I said, Muhammad Ali claimed to be a prophet. You know, this is how clueless I was. And then within 6 months, my friend of mine committed suicide. He hung himself at university. And it's very much, I was just going like a leaf in the wind, trying to find some sorts of direction and relevance in my life, and just trying to be happy, basically. I think that was really, in those days as a youngster, trying to be happy. Friend commits suicide. I think, my God, I'm going to go the same way if I don't find some sort of relevance, some sort of direction. I wanted that independence all my life, and now independence sucks. It's not what I thought it to be. And then, so I become a Muslim, really, let's see what it's all about. So let's try this one. And took it like a fish to water, because I was sick of the life that I had before, and I was ready for anything. So I took it with full throttle, and shaved my head, grew my beard as long as I could, got rid of every material possession. I thought I was a monk being initiated. And then I ended up going to Morocco for my year abroad, and that was probably the biggest wake-up call I ever had, as I was walking down to the old city of Morocco with a black turban on my head, dressed in a white garb, and all the Moroccans going, Khomeini, Khomeini, Khomeini to me. And I thought, maybe I'm just taking this a bit too seriously. So probably that year in Morocco was probably the most awakening experience I've ever had in my life. And as soon as I came back to England, so I'm just giving you a sort of summary of my journey. As soon as I came back to England, I was suffering from stress. I couldn't deal with England, and I couldn't stand England. I didn't like it before, and I definitely didn't like it now. Why? Because Moroccan Mediterranean lifestyle, very chilled out. People, I was so shocked. People had time for one another. They ate round one plate with one another, or as a family. They mentioned God's name without thinking they've insulted and offended somebody. They worked to live, not live to work. And I came back to England and I found the complete opposite. And I literally was suffering from physical stress. So I went to the doctors, the GP, and I said to them, look, I feel really stressed. I think I'm suffering from depression or something. They said, well, I could offer you Prozac or yoga. They said to me, and I said, I'm going back to Morocco. And so as soon as I graduated, I got an English teaching certificate, went back to Morocco, said, I'm never going to come back to England. I will never work in a mosque, and I will never marry a Pakistani, and I've done all 3. So I always say, never tell God you're never going to do something, because he will make you do it, make you eat your words. So anyway, I ended up in Morocco, and those 7 years were probably the most grounding experience for me in my life. Why? Now this is because Morocco really gave me relevance. I think first and primarily, the reason is because I felt not only that from an ideological perspective I was rooted in a tradition. So yes, I felt rooted in the tradition. I'm now a Muslim, and as Muslims obviously we believe that this is an ancient tradition that goes back to the beginning of time, where God created Adam, and with this message of the worship of one God, and this was conveyed through prophet to prophet to prophet, and then as each community, the message became corrupted. God sent other prophets in order to bring them back to this worship of one God. This is this feeling of you're part of something ancient. You know, you've uncovered your heritage. You've uncovered this belonging. So that was very powerful for me. But also, I think it was actually to experience it on a very practical level by living in a country that was steeped in Islamic history. Because Morocco, really Fez especially, it's a city that very much prides itself on its Islamic identity. And when I was there, I was just in a city that was 1,200 years old, that was probably the most well-preserved ancient city in the whole of the world. And I was studying part-time, I add, into the oldest university in the world. I was in this ancient city where there was just, everywhere you looked, there was some sort of historical relevance to what you were gazing upon, basically. There was someone buried there who was of significance, or some event happened there that was significant. And then you saw this, basically a community that were very much proud of their heritage and very much rooted in their traditions, and at the same time having to deal with modernisation and of the society now and how things were changing. And so that was very empowering for me to see that, because it contextualised things on a very practical level for me. And I became obsessed with Fez. And I found one book which was called Sadwat al-Anfas, which is written by a Moroccan scholar who passed away in the early 1900s, called Mohammed bin Ja'far al-Qahtani. And it's a book on all the history of Fez and all the famous scholars and righteous people and saints that were buried there. And he basically goes through the whole city just visiting. And we're talking, he goes through, it's 3 volumes, it's like over 5,000 personalities, and he basically takes you on a journey going around the whole city. So I started mapping the thing. No Moroccan, no Fezi had done this. And I mapped from the graveyards, the inner city of where he'd gone, and all the most prominent characters. And it became like I was like unlocking this history and heritage, and it was very, very empowering for me. And I became absolutely obsessed with it. And I don't know why, really, but now I see the relevance of that you feel part of something that's ancient. You feel part of something that has legitimacy and relevant, and you are part of that journey of imparting that message into your life and into the people around you in the next generation. So you have a mission, and that's what was really empowering for me. And so when I came back to England, what I noticed I completed this journey, which Joseph Campbell talks about. This as I said, separation, initiation, and return is all about death to the boy and life to the man, or for the woman as well. Is that saying goodbye to childhood and maturing into adulthood, so you can take on the responsibilities of life, which we're very much lost. Today I'm shocked to see now. You see, I'm in Sainsbury's, and you see adults buying these pyjamas where they're dressed up as like fluffy, teddies, and they actually go outside wearing these pyjamas. I mean, this is a clear example of the lack of maturation in our society, and that everyone wants to stay a kid because they can't deal with the responsibilities of adulthood. And Joseph Priestley, this is what this all is about, this initiation and separate. So you're becoming something, and there's a mentor that takes you through the process. This is very, very important, and we need to see people going through this process in order to show people how to be Muslim in the modern world. And I'm not just talking about everyone's suffering from this lack of identity. It's not just us as Muslims in Britain, it's Moroccans in Morocco, it's Saudis in Saudi. This struggle to find your relevance and to feel part of, and as I said, for Pakistanis, they've got, the Indo-subcontinent community, they've got a very interesting role to play here, because they've got this what they take from their traditions and heritage, and then how do they impart that, and how do they use that to assert themselves in this current climate they live in now in England. And it's something that seems very juxtaposed, because if we look at Eastern traditions, it's very much about the family, the unit, the tribe. And the Western society is very much about the individual. So the English mother says to Johnny, which flavour of ice cream would you like, darling? And he says, she says vanilla or chocolate, and he says strawberry. And she says, I'll get you strawberry then. And while the Pakistani parent says, you're getting chocolate, she's got 12 other siblings that I've got to feed as well, okay? And now, this pull that I've got to basically step in line for the sake of the unit, the group, but at the same time I've got individual needs and I need to express myself, because I've been brought up in a community, in a society that very much calls to that. And so this is the journey that every individual's got to make, and everyone's got a different journey to make. And it's very, very interesting historically, really. I find this fascinating, of how people made religion relevant for them in their society. So I'm going to give you some examples of this in Moroccan history, and then some examples of this in English history. So Fez it's really fascinating. I love this stuff. Is that every culture does this. They fabricate things about their culture and link it to their religious tradition to give relevance to the place they're living in. So for example, Fez, we have a hadith that's related from the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him. ستكون بالمغرب, there will be in the far west, مدينة تسمى Fez. There will be a city that will be named Fez. The Prophet ﷺ apparently said this. Okay. أهلها أقوم أهل المغرب قبلة. That the people of that city, Fez, will have the most accurate direction of prayer. Okay. وأكثرهم صلاة, and they will be the most devout in prayer. أهلها على السنة والجماعة. Their people will always be on the tradition of the Prophet ﷺ, peace and blessings be upon him, and the group, i.e. the vast majority of the Muslim community. ومنهاج الحق, and on the program or the method of truth. لا يزالون متمسكون به. They will still be holding fast to it. لا يضرهم من خالفهم. No one who tries to oppose them can harm them. يدفع الله عنهم ما يكرهون. Anything they detest, Allah will remove it from them. إلى يوم القيامة, to the day of resurrection. Yeah. There's a subhanallah. Now, this is obviously fabricated, this hadith. We also have in Muhammad bin Ja'far Qattani, he narrates in Sunnah al-Fas that there was a tribe from Ragraga who were Berbers from the south of Morocco that actually met the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca before he moved to Medina, and they spoke in Berber, North African Berber, and no one could understand what on earth they were going on about, but the Prophet ﷺ, he actually spoke to them in Berber and could converse with them. They accepted Islam and went back. Sounds a bit funky. You know? But interestingly, Khafaji relates this, who's got a commentary on, who's an Egyptian Azhari scholar that has a commentary on Shifa, Qadi'iyah. And I find this stuff fascinating because we have the exact example of this in English history. So I was opening up a book on English mythology, and the first quote, I was like, wow. William Blake, in his famous poem, Jerusalem, he says, and did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green, and was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pastures seen? And so, did Jesus ever put his feet in Glastonbury? And we have apparently, you know, on the research I've done, Joseph of, if I pronounce this correctly, Arimathea, is that pronounced correctly? I don't know. He was the one that actually took the body, apparently, who took the body of Jesus Christ after he was crucified, apparently, and washed his body and buried him. And then he travelled to England, of all places. And he ended up in Glastonbury. And he had a staff there, and one day he just plonked his staff down in the land of Glastonbury. It might be where they have the music festivals these days, I don't know. And it became a tree, and it's still there to this day. Okay, Subhanallah. Zahid, Subhanallah. Subhanallah. So now, obviously, this stuff sounds a bit crackpot to me, but I mean, being, you know, rational and, you know, and thinking with my head, this sounds a bit smelly and funky to me. But I think this is really interesting because it shows that the indigenous people were trying to find relevance to the religion that they've adopted in the land they are. Okay? And I'm not saying we start making up all this funky Islamic folklore in England, because I've got one with, is it the Qadr of Idris in Wales? One of the Snowdonian mountains is called Idris, the throne of Idris. I said, I bet he was it. So apparently if you go up to this mountain in Wales and spend the night there, you either go mad or you're inspired with unseen knowledge. I said to my friend Shabazz, come on, we're going. Like in Gaelic, Jesus is actual Isa. I was over in Ireland, this link between the Atlanteans. There's this theory that the North Africans are actually, the Irish come from the North Africans, Berbers, and the Black Irish are from them, and the songs are actually very similar. It's a very convincing argument. It's about a 4-hour DVD by an expert in mythology and Irish music called Bob Quinn. I find this stuff fascinating. And why? Not because necessarily it's true, but it gives relevance. And that, you know, we're not, as Muslims, we're not like, you know, some that we are like, for example, a Jewish diaspora, that we're always thinking we shouldn't be here, we need to be back in a holy land. Rather, we have relevance here, and so we feel a belonging here. It's very, very important that people feel like that. They feel rooted in the place they are. Because if they don't feel rooted and grounded, they're never going to feel whole. They're never going to feel centered, and they will have a schizophrenic crisis, basically. If you don't feel completely embodied and integrated in your experience of where you are, and your parents are saying, Bodur, you better pay for it, you know, your Shanakti card, you're going to have to, you know, make sure you don't know, one day they might kick you out, these white people. And you're going to go back to Pakistan, you might need to. You know, it's very disempowering, that sort of message. We have to feel that we are part of England, and we have this. It's not a hadith. It's not a hadith, but hubb al-watan min al-iman. That the love of a nation is part of iman. It's not a hadith, but the meaning's sound. Is that you feel a sense of the passion. And you know what's the irony of all this? Coming back to my story, was that when I had gone on that journey to find myself in another land, and fell in love with the culture of that land and the traditions and the civilization. Then I came back to England, and I became so fascinated about finding out about my history in England. Because I'd gone on a journey. I found myself, as I said, separation, initiation, and then the return. And now I want to find what's relevant for me. So I came to Keighley, and that was a challenge. Because Keighley is numbered as one of the most boring towns in the whole of England. Okay, I contest that. Okay, I find Keighley fascinating because they've got every sect under the sun in Keighley. I find it fascinating. We were the first spiritualist church in the whole of England in Keighley. You know, the Ouija boards and the seances and stuff like that. It was in Keighley first, and we have. We have every Christian denomination under the sun there. And the one thing I love, the centrepiece of Keighley, is the Temperance Hall. The Methodists, I think generally, it was the Methodists, I think, that sort of inspired this movement, I assume, with trying to combat alcohol in the working class in Yorkshire. And the Temperance Hall, you still see it says Temperance Hall on it, it's now Weatherspoons. I mean, the greatest of ironies. And I just love that, you know, you scratch the surface and you find something so special. And like, I became fascinated, I still haven't done enough research on it, and the Methodist movement within Yorkshire, like there was sort of the amount of Methodist churches in this small little town of Keighley, and their passion for education and so forth. How did the Irish, we have an Irish community in Keighley, and a very strong Catholic presence in Keighley. How did they survive and assert themselves in Keighley? We've got the River Airedale, the Ganges of Keighley. And I'm sure I can come out with something there. The spirit, the source of life of Keighley, and how we'll be bathing in it. I'll get them bathing in it before I leave. And so, but this, as I said, the whole is to look at see the metaphor here, and understand that we all have something that we need to discover in ourselves. And often more than not, it starts by discovering the landscape around you, and the people that you live amongst. And what does that imbue? That imbues is a sense of curiosity, and the nature of feeling alive in yourself is curiosity. If you are narrow-minded, you don't what you feel. You fear the other. You don't. You want to stay within your comfort zone. This is a clear symptom of trauma. And I'm very fascinated by trauma and its impact, especially transgenerational trauma. And the complete antithesis of trauma is curiosity. You can't be suffering in trauma. You can't be suffering and be curious. It's impossible. Like, someone cuts your leg and you go, isn't that interesting? Yeah, I'd like to measure the blood flow that's coming from my leg. Obviously it hurts. But you're not going to become completely overwhelmed in your suffering if you're curious. And so that's what happened. That's really what I took from when I came back, was this sense of curiosity about where I'm from. And I became I even did a gene test to find out where I'm from. I want to know where I'm from now. Well, before I couldn't give a monkey's where I was from. And I found out my roots. I'm not even Anglo-Saxon. I'm either Mongolian, my roots, or what's that Jewish community, the Russian Jew? Ashkenazi. I'm an Ashkenazi Jew of all ironies who becomes Muslim. My wife always says, that's a Jew, you look Jewish, you do. She said. So I became so interested, and that's when we become rooted in our communities, when we become curious and we want to learn. And it's so enriching. So when you sit on a train next to someone, you don't think, a few years ago this happened to me actually, and I've got a friend, I've got my hairdresser in Keighley, is a Italian Catholic, and right next to the Catholic church, St. Anne's in Keighley. And I remember the first time I walked into it, I was so entrenched in the Pakistani community in Keighley initially. I felt more comfortable with the Pakistanis. I walked into my barbers, and there was all these old white men, and I was like feeling, oh my God, these white people. And I sat down, I was like, I better not sit silently because they might think I'm a terrorist. And I was thinking, I had to have a reality check. Am I white? I call myself they say the Pakistani wants to be white, the coconut. I'm the opposite. I don't know what that would be. Something that's white on the outside and brown on the inside. I'm still yet to label myself. So I was sitting there thinking, well, huh? No, that's brown and white on the... I'm still yet to find out what...
English version of coconut.
Yeah, whatever it is anyway. I'm still yet to discover which one I am. Maybe a white chocolate Malteser, I don't know, or something like that. No, that's crunchy and brown on the inside. No, that's black and white in the... Come on, guys. So anyway, on whatever that is... Please get back to me to find out which one I am. And then I was sitting in there, and I was feeling really uncomfortable. And then I realised, what is this all about? You know, you should be curious. So strike conversation with people. Sit on the train. How you love? Do you need help with that? And you know, where you come from, or where you going? You know, where? And this is a prophetic sunnah. This is a practice of the Prophet ﷺ. What's the first thing he does? He asks a person, "What's your name? Where are you from?" I mean, we call it, it's the auntie syndrome, isn't it? We think they're being nosy and trying to find out stuff. It's actually just, you're trying to find commonality between one another. It's a psychological way to engage and find commonality. It's like, you know, trying to get 13 steps back to Kevin Bacon. I don't know if you know about that board game, but he's starred in so many movies that you name any actress or actor, you can get back to him in 13 steps. So he started with them, he started with them, he started with them. So that's basically the psychology of when we engage with people, how can we find a commonality? Where are you from? Oh, I've got a cousin there. Oh, a lovely place. You've made a connection straight away. That's the ultimate way of breaking down barriers. Another way is names. Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, had a canny habit of always asking about significance of your name. You say, "What's your name?" You say, "Edward." And I have no idea. What's the etymology? What's Edward mean?
Noble guard.
Noble guard. Allahu Akbar. So, Andrew, I think it was masculine or something. That's my birth name. And so, and then you start talking about that. That's interesting. Where's that from? Is it Gaelic? Is it Latin? Or is it? And you engage with someone, and you've got them. Okay. That's very, very important. You know, this is the ultimate way of the media. You know, when you have that sort of engagement, the media can't do anything to sort of pollute the sentiments between one another when you have that sort of link, asking after one another and so forth. But that comes. You need a level of maturity to do that. And so I feel it's incredibly important for people to feel grounded and find significance where they live, and so forth. So as I said, I'm just dipping in and out of topics, and it's really beautiful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, mighty and majestic, He in the Quran, He describes Iman, faith, as a tree. And the analogy of the tree is very beautiful. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا. Have you not seen how, the modality, the way Allah strikes a similitude? Now, it's very dramatic in Arabic the way it is. A similitude. A wondrous similitude, basically, and he leaves it at that. And then he goes, kalimatan tayyibatan. It's a nourishing, wholesome word. He says, word meaning here, not necessarily wording meaning one word, it could be a phrase, kalima can mean and so forth. Like, I want to have a word with you, Sonny. Just one then, Dad. You know, he means he's not going to give you a word. He's going to. So, kalimatan tayyibatan, a wholesome, goodly word. Which he's talking about, La ilaha illallah. There's no deity worthy of worship but God. This is the alluding to. كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ, like a goodly tree. أَصْلُهَا ثَابِتٌ, its roots are firm. وَفَرْعُهَا فِي السَّمَاءِ, and its branches are in the heaven, the high above. تُؤْتِي أُكْلَهَا كُلَّ حِينٍ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهَا, it gives its fruit, its yield, every moment, by the leave of its Lord. The Lord meaning the nourisher, the sustainer. You know, we always in the Quran we say, why didn't he say by bi'idhnillah? And why didn't he say by the leave of God? He said the leave of its Lord, as if he's nourishing it, nurturing it. So we are like trees. Our faith is like a tree. It needs to be rooted. And so we have the rootedness in our faith. We have the rootedness in a sense of where we are and who we are, and what we have to give in the society, and our relevance in the communities we are, and then we give. If we don't, it's impossible. If you're not rooted in yourself, we cannot give. It's impossible. If we're doing it, then we're actually, if we're trying to give when we're not rooted, we're just escaping we're running away from our own responsibilities. You know, and this is not to criticise, it's just a common example. The charity worker, as I said, charity work is very important, but the charity worker is constantly going out and neglecting their families and running around raising money for all these appeals, and their children and their wives or their husbands, they neglect them. This is someone that's not rooted. They're trying to basically get some sort of completion of their past and neglecting the real work that needs to be done to make them wholesome, which is their relationships with the people who are most immediate to them. And so you can't give if you haven't got something to give. And that's why Muslims, we say, we've got to call people to Islam. What are you going to call them to? I mean, that's my question. We couldn't, you know, it's like Jack Nicholson said, you want the truth, you can't handle the truth. You're not ready. We as a community, we need to be contributors before we can call people to something. If we love this thing and we want it for other people, and that's basically what calling is. It's that you, because if you call people when you haven't got to something to do, you generally just call traumatized people, and a lot of them you actually compound their trauma, and that's an example we have of that gentleman. Okay, is that he was a traumatized individual before he became a Muslim. You know, I'm convinced he was suffering from PTSD. You know, when you see what he was doing. And then he comes into Islam and he's attracted, he needs completion. He's been abused, this person, and he's lashing out in order to sort of find some completion in his trauma. And then so he's attracted to the most violent and misogynistic representation of Islam. That's what ISIS is basically. It's calling, I was just reading an article in The Guardian today about this. It's basically, they appeal to people who are basically misogynistic, who are failures and criminals. And it gives them redemption, because they're thinking, wow, I can get paradise despite who I am and my behaviours, and I just have to channel it in a halal way by killing heathens and getting sex slaves, you know, concubines and so forth. And as long as I can kill in a halal way, it's just someone basically trying to get completion. He needs therapy, you know. And if we don't have the infrastructure to help these people, we're going to compound their trauma, and we won't be able to prevent them from interacting with some of the worst elements of our community. And so this is very important, I think, and it's just a known thing, isn't it? You've got to work on yourself. If you want to change the world, you're going to have to start with Mr. Number One. If you don't start and open up to your own, and that's what I'm speaking to the converts and people, the people came back to the religion, which is most of the Pakistani community as well, finding ourselves, is that we come to our faith to try to get resolution, but when once the dopamine rush comes off of the honeymoon period, and the real work has to work, where I have to open up to my vulnerability, then we all become spiritual bypassers. You know, we run away, we use religion to escape from actually opening up. And this is a huge issue. I call it how are you doing today? This guy's suffering from, you know, he's been hit by, this is the Monty Python sketch where he gets hit by the car, and the guy goes, are you okay? He says, I'm fine, it's just a broken leg, and he's like dangling off his limb, you know, and you say, how are you doing? Oh my God, and he says, Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. No, you're injured. Alhamdulillah. Excuse me, brother. No negativity, please. Alhamdulillah. Praise be to God. God be thanked. Let's not be negative. This is spiritual bypassing. This isn't spirituality. You've got to open up to your vulnerability and admit that I've got to work on myself. So the problem is that we come to religion in order to solve the problems, but when God really opens us up to really do our work, we actually hide behind the facade of spirituality and religion in order to avoid it. And so my family are preventing me from becoming, you know, reaching my spiritual potential. You know, this isn't spirituality. This is you just compounding your dysfunctionalism with religious, lingo and practice. And so that's really we've got to open up to our vulnerability as a community, and because if you can't open up to your own vulnerability, how can you be vulnerable for Allah? Because Allah says He's the Ghani, He's the one who's all enriched and has no need, and you are the needy. Meaning you need to open up to your vulnerability and impoverishment and work on ourselves. This is very, very important, and this is the journey, the hero's journey. And I believe that our children, and this is what's so important, because I'm very passionate. When I came back, I looked at Islam in England, and I found it really fascinating, Islam in England. Obviously, one book, I've forgotten the title of the book, it was talking about Islam in the 17th, in Britain in the 17th century. I can't remember the title, it was something around that, wasn't it? And you had all these, England was very impoverished in that time, and you had all these, these Europeans running over to the Ottoman Empire, converting, so they had like America today, because there was more affluence and prosperity in the Muslim world. And then once things were collapsing, they came back and sneaked back into English land, and they had to repent in front of the altar. It was hilarious, honestly. Then we have, obviously, Mr. Quilliam coming in. Then we had the Somali and Yemeni community, the Shadili Darqawi Sufi movement in the port towns, South Shields and Newport and Cardiff and Liverpool and Hull and these places. I found those two communities specifically very interesting, because what I've been noticing when I look at those communities, they never survive past 3 generations. I found that really interesting. You have always, and they're always generally based around one personality. And then when the personality leaves the community, they pass away or they have to leave, the whole community basically collapses. So I find this really fascinating. And so 2 specific groups I was really interested in looking at today, because they're still around in about 2nd generation, was the Nazimi Naqshbandi community and the Murabitun community. Because they're hitting about 3rd generation now, so I'm really keen on seeing how they do that. Because I believe that that's really where as a community, we have to look at principles rather than becoming obsessed with the rituals. Now, let me clarify what I mean by that. So, what I noticed specifically, and I'm speaking because I'm coming more from a Sufi background, is that in Morocco and Pakistan and the Asian community, I noticed this, is that especially this generation, you have an experience, a spiritual experience, okay? So I had my spiritual experience in Morocco, and it changed my life. And I thought, this is what it's all about. I'm going to wear my jalaba, my Moroccan jalaba. I'm going to have my Moroccan tasbih bead, not my glow-in-the-dark plastic Chinese version. And I am going to bring the traditions of Morocco back to England, because that's what the Muslim community need. But the problem here is that they haven't experienced what I've experienced. I went through my journey and that changed me as a person, but they haven't had the same experience. And so what I noticed within the Sufi communities, what they do is they had a profound experience with a particularly charismatic religious leader, and it changed their life and enhanced their life, and they want their children to stay upon these traditions. And so I'm hoping this is resonating with sort of the members of the community, especially Indo-Paks, because it's the same thing really. But the problem, what I saw is that the 2nd generation generally they held to those, because they still had, because their parents were from back home, they have that sort of strength of a grounded identity with their parents' religion, their representation of their religion. But it's the 3rd generation that really struggles, because they do not have hardly any link to that. And so what happens is they go 3 ways, I believe. There's 3 ways you can go in this. The first way is is Maghrib coming in? Sorry. No. Oh, sorry. I'm completely confused by the... 7:25. Yeah, 7:25. There's 3 ways people can go. The parents were really loving to their kids and really instilled in them a love for their traditions that they find they hold so strongly to. And so they are passionate about it too. But they weren't able to contextualize it for them, so when they come to they'd like to come to the gatherings and so forth, and when they come home they feel part of it, but when they go outside the society is completely different, and they live this sort of bipolar life, and so outside of that environment they're completely, they look more like they're integrated into the Western society than they are into those traditions. And that's what I've seen in Morocco, and I've seen in Pakistan, the Indo-Pak community. Or their parents enforced this on them, and when you force something on someone, you always get resistance. And so they hate their parents. I call it, you know, when the Pakistani comes up to me and says, you know, bro, I don't understand, I can't relate to all this Hanafi stuff. You studied Maliki fiqh, didn't you? I went, yeah. He says, I want to be Maliki. I said, I call that a self-hating Pakistani. Yeah. He can't relate to his parents' traditions, and they enforced it on him in a way that he couldn't contextualise it, so he wants to find Islam through a different... So I always use that with... So all the Pakistanis that join the Murabitun community, I joke with them. I say, you're just self-hating Pakistanis. I want to be an Englishman and a Pakistani, and so... So there's, and then there's the third model, the balance obviously, which is the hardest thing, is that where they're able to actually integrate, take the principles of their parents. Their parents imparted those principles. They say, look, Buddha, I don't want you to wear the topi or the kufi that we wear. I don't want you don't have to dress like this. You don't have to have all the rituals, but the love and that sort of sense of belonging and groundedness that we have, you impart that to them. But you realise they've got their own journey, and they have to. We live in a society where someone had to feel empowered. They have to find their own their way, and you encourage that. You nurture them, rather than enforce something on them. Because if you enforce something on someone in a society, you're going to get resistance, which is what happened with me. And so you've got to nurture it from them. And so. This is what I saw, and so it's really important for the sake of the next generation that we really, really think about how we can do these things and go back to principles rather than becoming obsessed with a certain way. My way is the way that I found my religion, and so you've got to hold to all of this, and it really manifests in its most extreme. It really manifests in the most extreme way is where they basically say, you know, be careful of reading any other Islamic literature except for this literature because we don't want you to become corrupted. It's very, very suffocating, limiting way of presenting the religion. It won't last. It disempowers the individual, and they don't know how to function. And one of the biggest problems we have with our youth, specifically males, is they do not know how to take responsibility in their adult life. They've not matured. And it's a huge problem, and that's why I believe this theme of the hero's journey, about finding yourself. And I'm not saying basically, he says, Dad, I want to become a fine artist. Like, obviously, you've got to have a bit of common sense as well. How are you going to make money out of being a fine artist, you know? But you know, what are the skills you have, and how could we do that whereby you enrich your life and you can be of service to others and support yourself in that as well? I'm not saying that, but you guide them. You don't enforce them. You're going to be a doctor, you know? And I don't mean a PhD doctor. I mean a real doctor. You're trying to nurture them. It's so important. And as I saw, I'm not just talking to the Pakistani community here, the Indo-subcontinent community. I'm talking about us as converts. It's really important that we understand when we have children, in order for this legacy to really have relevance, we've really got to empower them in themselves, and and that's the power of story. Story is so important for relevance. Why do you think what particular movies really just enchanted you when you were a youngster? For me, it was movies like Star Wars and all these things, because it was about this journey. It's all based on the hero's journey. George Lucas was a very, very close friend of Joseph Priestley, who came up with this hero's journey. And so that's what I'm really... So things that we have to focus on as a community is about letting our children go find themselves, which is exactly in my life. I had to find myself. And then for giving them relevance in their tradition of their either their traditions if their grandparents are English or Pakistani or Gujarati or whatever, that basically taking those principles to give them a story that they can contextualize for their life. That's very, very important. So we have to do that for ourselves first and foremost. Because the hero's journey is about, life is a struggle. And it's about having the courage to face it, not run away from it, and that you and Allah, God Almighty, has put you in that situation. As long as you rely on Him, He can get you through it. But don't give up. And it's the perfect example of that is in Surah Yusuf. Surah Yusuf is beautiful. Why? There's 12. I love this theme. 12 steps of the hero's journey. Okay, which is a chiasm. It comes back on itself. It's circular. Surah Yusuf. I think it's phenomenal. Surah Yusuf, the chapter of Yusuf, Joseph, is chapter 12. It's 12 brothers. It's 12 themes. That's a chiasm coming back on itself. The beginning is a dream, and then the end is a manifestation of the dream. In the middle, it's the journey, and it's all struggle. You read that story of chapter of Joseph, you're like, the beginning, wow, a dream. Everything's going to be cushy in his life. He's living it up. And then from there, beaten up, thrown down a well, sold into slavery, accused of, messing around, put into prison. Not just that, have another few years there as well. You're thinking, if you get caught in the linear narrative, you think, this story's messed up. But where's the manifestation of the dream? If you get caught in the details, you say, I'm not going to continue reading this story, it doesn't make sense. But then when you get to the end, you think, oh, now it makes sense. If I can see it from a more divine perspective, we can basically transcend beyond linear time and see it's a timeline in front of us. You see all those things have to happen. And that's the hero's journey, from childhood to maturation. And I said it really, really scares me, the lack of maturation in our society today. And specifically, we really struggle, I think, the Muslim males in this, because more than anyone else. I think an Asian lad really has the hardest job in the world. He's got to please his parents, he's got to please his wife, he's got to please his kids, he's got to get the best job. He's got so many things, he doesn't live his life. He's after doing everything for everyone else. And he cracks at 35, and he has his secret marriage in Morocco. It's happening.
You know it all.
Huh?
You know it all.
I do. I know what's happening. I've got my spies in Morocco. I know what's going on. Or the guy that basically got married from back home, and then he says, oh no. Like this scenario came to me, and it drives me nuts. I want to smack my head against a wall. He says, he married from back home, and I said, okay, and then, he made a mistake. He basically went out with a white girl on the side because he didn't choose to get married. This girl. What happens? He gets her pregnant. What's next? He comes up to a scholar. He says, "What do I do? I suppose I should marry the second one. Second marriage, permissible." And he comes up to me, and I said, "No. You don't cover up your irresponsibility by using legalism. You go back to your first wife, you tell her what you did, and then she decides whether she wants to stay married to you, you scumbag. Take responsibility for your actions. And then, if she decides to keep you, you're going to have to break the relationship with the girl, but you're still going to have to pay for the upkeep of the kid." But he says, "But I went to Maulvi Sahib, and he says I can marry another woman as long as she says I'm a Muslim, she accepts Islam, and I don't have to provide for the other child because he's an illegitimate child, and I don't have to admit to that I've actually fornicated because you're supposed to cover up your lies." We can all. This is legalism gone nuts. So 5 minutes. So I'm on my rant now. So this is what I'm saying is we've got to stop getting clogged in the details of things and take responsibility. This is so important. This is empowerment. And so our children, we might have gone through that disempowerment. Why do it to the next generation though? And I said, we as a convert community, we went through a certain path. Our children maybe have a path that they need to go on as well. We impart the pact, because what does our children really want to see from us? They want to see passion. They want to see that you feel in your mistakes and your successes. They want to say, this is my story of my life, son, daughter, and this is where I made mistakes, this is where I passed, and you need to go on in your journey and impart that. This is really where we need to really reach out. And so I've touched on a number of themes about about how to deal with our current climate, and things I've been pondering about. So these are certain points that I'm going to just summarise with. We have to empower ourselves in an environment by dealing with our circumstances. And we have to see how we can, if we always limiting ourselves, we tell our children ourselves, oh, we can't do that because that's haram. We can't do that because that's haram. You can't do that. We're constantly telling people we can't do things. We're going to basically, what you do is you debilitate people. They can't do anything. So sometimes we're going to have to go with the principles over the legalism so that we can actually assert ourselves in society. You know, and I think a brilliant example of that is like Nadia, for example, on British Bake Off. You know, she did more for the Muslim community. If you think about it, you know, initially with the British Bake Off to change the impressions of the Muslim woman in society, in English society, then you went, astaghfirullah al-azim, you know, shouldn't be a woman, Muslim woman shouldn't be on TV. So she hugged that pool at the end as well, you know, Duba, you know, like just get over it. Like sometimes we have to get ourselves into uncomfortable situations. Sometimes we're just going to have to do things on the spot because we've got to deal with our circumstances. If we're always paranoid about, I've got to do everything right 100%, you're going to give yourself a nervous breakdown. It's a real big problem. And I've been there. We've got to deal with the reality in front of us. And so that we have to come out. Okay? And as I said, we have to look for the relevance around us. As the Prophet ﷺ said, it's a weak hadith, that wisdom is the lost thing of the believer. He snaps it up wherever he finds it. Islam, when did it thrive historically? In the first generations where it just went out into all these different cultures and was confronted by them, and they were like, how do we, basically they sieved through different cultures, meaning taking the essence of it, the best of it, leaving the chaff at the end that wasn't compatible, but that was very few. And then they even enhanced it and made it even better. That's what we need to do. That's the greatest service we can do in the communities that we're in. And this is, we have to talk about survival of the religion rather than being perfect Muslims. It's a matter of survival, this is. And when you're in survival mode, you can't be thinking about, you know, you can eat the pig. You know, that's what I'm saying. You have to think about the long-term situation as Muslims in England. It's very, very important we think about these things. And we are going to make mistakes, but being safe is not safe all the time. We have to be, what's the hero's journey? It's all about, you have to step into uncharted waters. You're going to have to make some decisions. But what do I say? I always say this dua. After the Prophet, peace and blessings, at the end of his Maghrib prayer, after his 2 sunnahs, he would say, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik. O turner of hearts, keep my heart firm upon the heart. You make that intention. You say, I might not be doing, we are going to make mistakes. But it's who's the most successful people in life? The people who make the most mistakes, but they're sincere. I'm trying. I'm not trying to be Mr. Perfect. I'm trying to basically find myself, and I know what I can take and what I can't take. And I've got to be real to myself as well in this situation. That's really empowering for your children to see that, because it's your story now. And then the other thing is consultation as a collective. We have to come together. You know, I'm speaking here now. I don't want you to think everything I've said's right. It frustrates the living daylights out of me when people say, Shaykh Saab said it, teacher said it, we must follow him. No, I'm just a person that's speaking about my life experience, what's worked for me. If you are having anxiety in your life and your life's messed up, and something that I've said today resonates with you, why not have a go? Try apply it. If your life's not working, you've got to change the model. If it doesn't work for you, that model though, and it messes your life up even more, junk it. Most of the advice that religious scholars give, 75% of it is their life experience. Now, if I'm telling you, you know, it's 5 prayers, not 6, alcohol's, you know, not halal and all this sort of stuff, that's a different issue. This is rooted in our textual sources. But when it's talking, a lot of what the scholars are giving their life experience. And so you have got a brain in your head, you know, these yes men, they're basically, Shaykh Saab said it, I've got to do it. completely unrooted people. They're not grounded in themselves. They're walking around saying, "Oh my God, what should I do? Should I do this? Should I?" You know, get grounded. Get your feet stuck in the ground. Sort yourself out. And they're always no one individual holds the absolute truth. I've got to say everything that person did. It's ridiculous. We don't do that in any sphere of our life. Why does it suddenly in religion? I say 2 areas of our life that we mess up in: relationships and religion. We have no common sense. We lose our common sense in relationships and religion. And so we really have to get our heads screwed on. And I said the role of scholarship in the future, I believe in England, is that we have to give people tools that enrich them in their life. Because we're in a quagmire at the moment. We've got, now with the social media, sorry, I know this is my last minute. I believe we're in a quagmire of opinions now. It's like we're just so confusing. So now we've got to stop speaking from a legal perspective, focusing on whether it's legally correct or not. It says, does it work for us in our life? That's going to really, people will see the truth then of the message. So when I'm giving an example, when I'm giving someone a legal edict, I'm thinking, does this serve them towards empowering them so they can appreciate God and so forth? And so that's what when we take legal opinions, and scholars have to see that that's their role now. We're just advisors. We're not sitting on we're not qadis telling people basically you have to do this and you have to do that. We're not in that position of authority anymore. We are, and so we have to understand that as well. And so these are just some of my thoughts basically about the future of Islam in England. As I said, it'd be interesting. I really like talking at the end, having as much discussion as we can about these issues. Inshallah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. No?
Was that just stretching?
So nobody with a brain in their head thinking of themselves this evening?
Yes. How do you say? Your name is?
My name is Javed.
Javed, pleasure to meet you.
I think Edward just challenged. That's why I responded. So well done, Edward. I thought that there would be opportunity for others to ask a lot of questions. I've got loads of questions. But I think, mashallah, you said about a 3rd generation test. It's very, very interesting. And I echo, a lot of those concerns. And particularly for your point about getting them to open up, getting them to empower them, rather than telling them, don't do this, but to empower them and to contextualize. And what we're getting through in this current environment with the Parliament incident is what I'm trying to go. What are the kind of things that we should be doing to actually get our name of our religion coming out positive? Because anything, people when they see yourself and people like Edward, they're really, I know them, they were very impressed. These are the people who have accepted Islam. But unfortunately, the white media is seeing a very different example. What we as a Muslim community can do to actually portray the right message about the converts, or the reverts as we call them, into the wider world.
So, question about what should we be doing to portray Islam in the best possible light, given the media context that we're in? Great question, thank you. We'll take another question.
So in America at the moment, there's a lot of discussion.
I hope someone can remember that question because I have a very bad short-term memory. Yes, go on, Anna.
In America at the moment, there's a big discussion in the American Muslim community around culture creation. So Dr. Umar has talked to the Americans about this kind of need now to be culture creators. So what does that look like for us here? Do we need to be culture creators as well?
I've never done it like this before. I usually answer one question.
Okay, sure. If that's better for you, then we'll run it like that.
Okay. Right. In terms of Javid's question about how do we, we're always going to have nutters. That's the reality. And so, and the problem, I'll address it on. First of all, we have to deal with things on a micro level. We can't deal with things on a macro level. We don't have the resources to do it. I believe. The way, on my Facebook page, whenever there's a travesty, it's a call to action, I say. So, I don't think the need is necessarily to denounce and explain and so forth. I said straight away there was an initiative that was came out in the first few days, was about raising money for the families of the victims. So Muslim, and I thought it was brilliant, because basically action speaks louder than words. And now you might say, well, the typical response is, well, we're not responsible for this. Why should we do this? Who cares if we're not responsible? If you see someone that suffered, you help them out. So what do you say when a car knocks over someone? I didn't do it. I'm not going to help him. So when things like this happen, we show through action. That's very important. And the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, I cited the hadith. Khalid ibn Walid, he made a mistake in a battle where he killed a number of individuals. And when it was brought back to the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, what happened, he immediately said, I absolve. So he did speak out. Okay, so he did by word. He said, I absolve myself from what Khalid did. Okay, first. But then immediately, what's very interesting what he did, he paid the blood wits, basically. The money for the people, every single individual that was to every family of the victims. And so it's interesting the way he reacted there. And so I said, this is a sunnah here. We should, regardless of we're responsible or not, give out to these people, show compassion. That's very, very important, that we act in whatever capacity we can. Like when you fit in trauma and travesty and what's debilitating is when you feel you can't do anything. And so it's very important to get resolution in something, you do something. It's very empowering and makes a person to be able to do that. The other thing is just generally, as I said, opening up to the community, the wider community. As I said, simple things about, I was on the train today and, it's twice, I'm not usually on trains that often, say, oh, you're right, love, do you need help with that? How are you? And not, just saying, oh, where are you from? What's your background? And then you end up talking about Islam indirectly to people, so people get an idea of what Islam is about in an indirect fashion. I was sitting on the bus today, I'm a Muslim, but I don't agree with what happened in Westminster. That's going to get people even more worried about us. So we don't need to take that sort of approach. But just general chit chat and so forth, and ask about them and their background, and then they're obviously probably reciprocate and ask where you're from. Oh, I did this. Oh, that's interesting, and so forth. That's very much engagement, curiosity. I think these are very simple things that we can do on a daily. And so Muslims, us feeling that basically we're scared sometimes, often to step out of our comfort zone, and we've got to get out of our comfort zones. And I think a big mistake that I made as a Muslim when I became Muslim was I cut a lot of my relationships with my non-Muslim friends. And because I thought, sometimes it was unsavoury, their pastimes and so forth. But I think that's a big mistake. And what's interesting about Abdullah Quilly, I was speaking to Yahya Burt this week, who's doing his thesis on the Muslims in Britain, and he says that was one thing we've made as a mistake, because people like Abdullah Quilliam, they didn't cut their ties. They kept, their social circles. And really interesting characters like Abdullah Quilliam, he was telling me, was criticised for being part of the Masons. And Amir Abdul Qadir al-Jazairi, who's one of my heroes, the great mujahid of Algeria against the French, he was a Mason. Really interesting. Now, it's not that they absolutely agree with everything the Masons stood for, but they saw it as a means to connect and network, because they've realised these people are powerful people. So we have to think outside the box. Muslims, we can't be politicians because we don't agree with that party, that party. Get real. You've got to defend the needs of the Muslim community. Oh, like the Lord Mayor, my friend who became the Lord Mayor of Keighley, Pakistani. He's got wear a gold. Basically, he didn't want to wear it. The gold. What do they call it? I don't know what they call it. The chain. He says, I don't want to wear it, and they said, no, it's necessary. You have to, Lord Mayor, you have to wear it. So he wore it. Now, think of the service that he's doing as a Pakistani, as a Lord Mayor, over this focusing and becoming so obsessive over details and limiting yourself. So we've really got to, think outside the box. And sometimes we've got to have it. We become fixated on the trees and don't see the forest. And so I think that's really, really important for us. Does that answer your question, Jeff? Yeah. The next one was Anna's question was about the culture thing. Now as I said, this is just my opinion on it. I think what's very healthy is finding is the relevance of Islam in English culture historically. That's because we've got to learn from history. That's very important, like I was talking about. As you know, I don't know what that means. Does that mean we talk about how Muslims, an English Muslim, does he have an outfit he wears, and you know, a design and architecture of the mosque and so forth? I'm not really that interested in that sort of thing. I think, because we're not even there yet, I think it's more interested to focus on now of my journey. And everybody's journey is different. You know, some English guy might like walking around in a pair of shawakamis and, you know, being a tablighi on the Tablighi Jama'ah. That's his thing. Am I going to, you know, deprive him of that? So everyone's got their own journey. But I think the more is to look at these principles, and I think that's why the hero's journey is such a powerful message, because it's about being rooted in where you are, and I think that happens organically when you look at that, when you take that approach. So I think that's more important. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes, the brother at the back. So your name is?
Yusuf.
Yusuf. Go on, Yusuf.
I'm from South Africa.
Yes.
And we are at the moment 12th generation Muslim.
Yeah, South Africa is very fascinating. I'd love to. Sorry to cut you off, Yusuf, yeah. But South Africa, I think we can learn from them a lot, because obviously they're the only. I think it's the only Muslim culture outside of a Muslim land that's been out for many generations.
It came in 1652.
And they've actually got their own culture, especially the Malay, haven't they?
Yeah.
The Malay, so it's very fascinating that. And
the essence of what I wanted to say is,
yes,
the following: is that it flourished. One of the predominant reasons why it flourished was because the indigenous people and later the settler community from Europe, mainly the Dutch and the British, accepted the Muslims as part of the soil of that land.
Right.
And in the absence of that, I find it very difficult that Muslims here will feel settled.
So it's a very different situation here.
It's a different situation, yeah. And there's an active policy. Right? Mass media, whether it's print media, whether it's visual media, to force through a paradigm that, you know, they're not really part of the soil of this land. Despite some people being here for more than 80 years.
Yes.
And that's a two-pronged problem that you have in this country. You have what we have to obviously do to establish ourselves as a community, but the indigenous people of this land must also accept the fact that we are here to stay. South Africa, Islam has been there now for 350 years and it's still flourishing. You know? You have the Anglican church where the bells are ringing, right next to it you have a masjid where the azan is going off. Muslims are not complaining about the bells and the Christians are not complaining about the azan. That is the essence of that one.
Is that because South Africa, is it because you have got such a mix of different cultures that have actually settled in that land as well?
Yeah,
it's a different setup, isn't it?
But there is an acceptability and people are very accepting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be fascinating for someone to do some deep research on how.
It's 12 generations now.
Yes, and actually, from that perspective, it contradicts a lot of the stuff I say, because even if you look at the Gujarati community, they've actually they still make.
In the first democratic cabinet in 1994,
yeah,
there were 3 Muslims, 2 Jews, Christian in the cabinet that Nelson Mandela constituted.
Yes.
But it's an acceptance that that person is a part of the soil of this land. That's where it stops.
Yeah, and I think in our context, I think the only way we can do it is basically by learning and then being able to educate about, you know, and this happens, you know, we do have the opportunity. If you notice, like foreigners, when they come to another land, and I did this in Morocco, is they end up learning the language better than the people that live there, because they have to learn the grammar and all these sorts of things. And that's very impressive when people can do that. And so when we have more knowledge about the land and so forth than the people do, and we show, you know, we connect them to their traditions as well. That's what I try to do when I give talks and stuff. I like to go into English history and use it. Like when I went to Ireland recently in Dublin, what's the first thing I did? I started asking about them, about what's the social dynamics, what's their history, what's their mythology. I want to know all these things because I'm going to make comparisons when I do my talk. So I did this link between St. Patrick and the Prophet, peace be upon him, because it was St. Patrick's Day the next week. And I talked about, so I made these links. I think it's very important that Muslims, they educate them about the history of their land, of the land they live in. So, and then they basically look at those principles from that and draw them from their own traditions. And that's why, for example, I'm passionate about this hero's journey, finding it in the Seerah literature. Because the problem with the problem we have with the Seerah literature, it's very historical, it's very factual, and kids need stories. And so it's very important that we try to, and they need to be able to draw principles. We struggle to we struggle to find significance in the metaphor, and we're very literalistic now in this society, and we need to go back to that. And so that's very important.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Yeah. Yes, the lady at the back. Her name is? Mediha. My salam.
I come from the Pakistani community.
Yes.
And you mentioned earlier about vulnerability and how we need to accept our vulnerabilities and empower ourselves in the journey of vulnerability. However, we live in the Pakistani community where, as you mentioned, it's frowned upon to
very much so.
vulnerability, and it's translated as ingratitude towards Allah, and we're encouraged to say alhamdulillah and accept whatever is happening.
Yeah, because that's social bypassing.
Yeah. So how do we then?
So that's a spiritual bypass.
Sorry, how do we then, in such a community, create safe spaces where we as a community can share vulnerabilities and journey through together? Can you share maybe examples of where this has worked?
Yeah. Well, I think first of all, I think the religious leaders have to do it to make it acceptable, and they're not going to do that because, as I said, that's what I do. I just tell it as it is. I'm tired of facades now, and I just tell people what it is, whether you like it or not, because people have to know that they can open up. Because you know what? If we don't open up, we're going to have a major apostasy issue on our hands. That's the problem. Because people, if they can't talk about their issues, I'm not talking about they get on TV and start talking about, like what's that show? Women's, I can't remember that show where women talk about everything under the sun. Huh? Loose Women. I'm not talking about that. But I'm talking about they have a space. And the Prophet ﷺ, he had this. This is really interesting. Everyone knows the hadith, but we don't contextualize it. A man comes and he says, I love Islam, but I love to fornicate. And then the companions around the Prophet, they wanted to grab the guy and give him a good old lick. How dare you speak like this in front of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him. And what did the Prophet say? He said, leave him be, let him come forward. And then he basically engaged with him. Now, when he engaged with him, what's really, I think, fascinating here, they engaged on an intellectual level first. He says, look, if you fornicate with someone, would you accept if someone fornicated with your mother or your sister or your wife or so forth? And he said, God, no. He says, well, isn't that woman that you are fornicating with someone's sister or someone's auntie or someone's and so forth? So it's an intellectual level. But that's not enough. So he was like, oh, you've got me there. But then what was really interesting, he put his hand on the man's heart and he made prayer for him. And he made God remove this from his heart. And the man said it instantly left me. So what's interesting, when we engage with people, first, safe space. You give the person an opportunity to express themselves. That's very important. Because if people don't express themselves, I'm telling you, they will leave. Yeah? They can basically disassociate. They can come back with rage, which we're seeing. In the Asian community, where families are so tight-knit, where they can't express themselves, they basically go mentally loopy. If you can't express yourself and you don't feel understood. And then we think it's jadoo or something else, black magic or something. No, it's not. Okay. And so, but I think, for Mediha, first of all, I think we need to create safe spaces. And like I was speaking with the brothers beforehand, they need to be neutral spaces. We can't do that in the mosques. And people that are real, That's what I want to try this. I'd like to create this in the young scholars of the communities, is that basically they're working on themselves. I believe every scholar who studied sacred knowledge, they should have they should study counselling. It's so irresponsible if you are dealing with the community's needs and you've not studied psychology and done a bit of counselling and so forth, because you can really compound the problems if you don't do that. And you're working on yourself, because when I did therapy, when I studied with Hakim Archuleta, I said, okay, let's start. And he went, I'm working on you first, mate. He says, you've got to do your work before we can start. I just thought, I want to help other people. You're going to have to do you first. Oh, I don't want to do that. That's too much. That's a bit scary. And so they have to be working on themselves. And that's clear. And so they have to be upfront and talk. The scholars have to be upfront and talk about these issues. So people think, my God, I don't have to feel shame for this anymore. Because there's a lot of ignorance in the community. You know, I've got a classic example. We were on Arafat. We was the day of Arafat. We're all in Arafat, the plains of Arafat, and the women start crying. Some of my wife and the friend will start crying. It's the day of Arafat. The auntie said, haram, haram, you can't cry, you've been forgiven. It's the day of Arafat, you've been forgiven, you don't cry. That's like, this is just, there's this fear of people expressing themselves. And we have to change that. The only way we can change that is by talking with one another, engaging. But you have to find people who are like-minded, and find circles of people that will support you in this. I do this through talking with people, Mediha. Does that answer your question?
In terms of the foreseeable future, it's not likely that, it doesn't appear that the leaders of the scholars are going to come forward.
Yeah, I'm trying. It's got to work on a micro level before macro level. This is very, very touchy, sensitive stuff. And I'm aware that, you know, people react to this, but you've got to do your little part.
So as an individual, would you say that each individual needs to be exposed to, you know, some sort of like psychology or therapy, etc., to be able to, you know,
You've got
a safe space, not necessarily physically safe space, but a safe space, or can as individuals on a one-to-one?
Well, first of all, you start with your own. And then you start, what I do is I meet with people, I talk about these. People that basically look at me as if I'm an idiot. I think, I can't work with these people. People that think, wow, you've really touched a nerve there, I want to talk about this, say, I can work with this guy. Oh, I find out this Muslim's a psychiatrist or a psychologist out. Oh, I start networking with people. You build an organic community around you. Does that,
Yes.
yeah, that's what you need to do. I think